This time I've got a Technics 5-disc CD changer that was brought into me. Complaint was it doesn't play the disc. But the guy just had it given to him, so who knows, maybe it's a customer problem, maybe there's a real problem. We'll find out when we get into it. This could be a 5-minute video, or this could be a 50-minute video. I don't know. I got this Technics CD player, 5-disc CD player in for service, and the guy that owns it says it doesn't work. He says there's discs in it. The fellow that owns this, it's actually the same guy that had that fancy Toshiba receiver that everybody was admiring a few years ago. That big brute of a receiver. Same guy that owns this. He was doing some work at one of his clients' place, and the guy had 2 CD players just sitting on a table, and he said, hey, you want one? Take one. Whichever one you want, you can have. So he had this given to him, and of course it doesn't work, so I get to see why it's not working. It's got some CDRs in the unit. Surprised the discs are actually still sitting in their trays. I guess he didn't turn it on its side like everybody does. Most people, when they're carrying their CD players around, they end up dumping the discs everywhere. That part works. How often does that happen when someone brings something in and they say it doesn't work and it works fine? All the time, actually. Even though this unit played, the guy that owns it insisted it wouldn't play. He said it spun up the disc and it wouldn't play. Actually, his words were, it picked the disc up, did not spin, dropped it, and moved to the next one. That was his complaint. So we'll just give the optical pickup an inspection. I don't expect to see anything really wrong here, but we'll check it out anyway. Now I'm thinking the start of disk switch is probably where the problem is. Either that or a stuck traverse. This one is not a linear motor. I believe this is more of a conventional with gears. So we'll check the traverse out and see whether it just needs to be lubricated. And then I'm going to run this thing. Put some hours on it. To release these little clips on the front. This is what holds the traverse in place. We take out these 2 little clips, and then the entire traverse will lift out without much difficulty. Push the lever back and the traverse will lift up. Stuff like that. We can unplug the ribbon cable over here. Lift the traverse out, and I basically don't even have to take it apart more than this. I can actually get into this worm gear. It looks like there's a fair bit of lubrication on it already, so that might be not an issue on this one. Sometimes it had a tendency to dry up But this one here looks to be that there's lots of lube on here, so I don't even think that's necessary. What I'm thinking of is it's the switch at the start of disk that's dirty, the contacts. So I'm just going to use my power supply. I've got it set for about 3 volts. I'm just going to use this to drive the optical pickup all the way to the end of its travel. So now I've pushed the pickup all the way out to the end. There's a small switch. You can see it right down in through here. The switch gets activated when the laser is at the front of its travel. And what it does is it signals the microprocessor that the laser is at the start of the disk, so it can start to read. I talked to the guy that owns it, and he said no. He says it rotated into position, it lifted the disk up, the disk did not spin, it dropped the disk, moved to the next disk, and then did that. And he says that's all it would do, was go round and round and round, pick the disk up, not attempt to spin. So he was quite shocked actually when I phoned him and told him that it was working. So he told me to go back and check it again. So this is what I'm doing. I'm checking it. I'm thinking probably it's this little switch down here that is acting up. So we're going to get some cleaner into that switch. Probably the best way to clean it is to actually unsolder the motors so I can lift the board off, so I can actually get right into that switch and clean it. I got to undo the solder connections here on the 2 motors. I'm going to do this without disconnecting the laser pickup because I don't need to have to put all the protection and so forth onto the pickups to do that. So let me just warm up the solder iron. We'll undo the board and clean that switch. This problem happens more with CD players that have been sitting around without being used for a number of years. The contacts in those little switches can go bad. The pin switches were worse than the leaf switches, but the leaf switches certainly can experience the same type of problem that pin switches have. So I'll get the last of my solder wick. I'm almost out. Well, not almost out. This roll is almost out. But it's lasted me a while. I've had this for several years, this roll. I remember the guy that I worked for, he hated it. He insisted that I use a pump, a solder pump, because he didn't like to have to buy this stuff. And he used to use this vacuum pump. I've still got it, right? I've still got just a one-shot mechanical one. I hated it. I had a nice powered vacuum, but the boss wouldn't buy the tips for it. It seemed like every time I went to use it, the tip was clogged, and they gave us these stainless steel push rods that you push into the tip to clear out the solder. But it seemed like almost every time when I was using it, it would not work, and I'd have to buy a new tip. And the tips were costing more than I was costing to use the solder braid, but the boss didn't like using solder braid because to him, a $20 roll of solder braid that lasted a few months was money wasted. But the solder sucker tips would only last a few weeks, and they were almost as expensive. The guy I worked for was not very reasonable at certain things, and one of them was shop supplies. He would always get upset if we were wasting things like cleaners, alcohol, and stuff. Those were things that used to drive him crazy. And consumables like this. Of course, my take on the consumables always was, you got to use these things to do the job right. course, that's one of the reasons why I never had an air station, because the boss who was buying the equipment, I could have had an air station if I wanted to spend the money, but back in those days, air stations were ridiculously expensive. Like, we're talking several $1,000s, and I certainly wasn't about to go out and buy one, and the owner of the shop wasn't going to go out and buy one, so we never got one. I think the most expensive piece of equipment I ever got in that shop, and we never made any money from it, was Panasonic had a requirement for dealers that serviced CD players that we had to purchase this very, very expensive piece of test equipment for setting up the first generation CD players. And it was, I think, a $1,700 piece of equipment. And it got used once to do a warranty repair, which I think they paid $50 on. And it was a $1,700 piece of equipment that we had to buy to do it. And yeah, the boss never let that one go. All the years, you know, the fact that he had to buy this stupid thing, he was not happy at having to spend all that money on this piece of test equipment that we were required to have as a warranty dealer for Panasonic, and because of it, it never got paid off. And all the time, because Panasonic changed their design the next year and no longer required this jig, so the next generation of machines didn't need it, and yeah, the costs were never recovered, and the boss never ever let me live that one down, because it was one of these things where the service manager called up one day and he says, "Oh, if you guys want to retain your warranty service center status, you need to get this jig." So I said to the boss, I went and talked to the boss, because he called me, right? The guy from from Panasonic, the service manager, calls me up and he says, "Well, we're not going to approve any more of your claims unless you have the equipment." Just putting some deoxit in there. We'll rub the contacts a bit. Because you have to have the equipment, or you cannot process any more warranty claims. So I went and talked to the owner and I said, "Yeah, Steve at Panasonic says that we have to have this test jig, because there's no way to align these machines without it, and we need to have it as part of our warranty status." So the boss never really said order it, but he didn't say don't order it. He just kind of grunted. That was his attitude. So anyway, I called the service manager back and I said, "Yeah, I talked to the owner," and yeah, he said, "Yeah, whatever." Right? So if we need to have it, we need to have it. What he didn't tell me was that they were going to bill us for this thing. So I think the boss thought, okay, we're a warranty depot, they're going to send us this equipment so that we can do the warranty work. And then the bill arrived for it, and it was like $1,750. And, well, then the boss wasn't too happy. Then the boss was giving me a new one, ripping me a new one for spending all this money on this this test jig. And as they say, we used it once. I think once was all it was used. It sat in the box the rest of the time. It never ever got touched again. And the owner of the shop never ever let me live that one down. For the remainder of my time there, I was a bad guy, because I cost him all this money. I cost him $1,700 because the jig was $1,750, and we got one $50 repair out of it for warranty, and that was it. So the owner of the shop was not too pleased with that one. He was not too pleased with me. He was not too, well, he wasn't too pleased with anybody. Needless to say, when I left the shop, there was one very expensive jig there that nobody used and was useless. And of course, the bigger problem was that it was only required for the first generation of Panasonic and Technics CD players that had the ones with like all the controls that you had to adjust, the analog, you know, for focus and tracking and stuff. You couldn't do it without this jig. It was required. You hooked your scope up to it, but these machines didn't have, like, you didn't have the standard RF out where you could look at the eye pattern and so forth. They had a header that plugged in on the side of the board. And it had a bunch of test points on it that you hooked up the scope to, and it had lights that you would adjust it. Like, it had like a red light, a yellow light, and a green light, and you would adjust it until the green light came on. It actually made setting them up pretty simple. You could pretty much do it without a scope with this jig. And had they carried on with the entire line using this one jig, it would have been great. But as I say, the next generation came along, they went to digital servos, there was no adjustments. They went from like 10 controls down to 0 or 1 control. I think it was 0 after that. It was just all done automatically. So we'll pull the laser assembly back into place, or the traverse assembly, and drop it in, and it should just snap in. They go in pretty simple. They go in pretty easy compared to taking them out. Just push it down, and it should drop into place. Like that. And then plug in the connector. Clamp in place. Dope. Well, there it is. It's playing. I'm going to let it play for a while. But say I don't know whether I got the problem or not, because when I first plugged it in, it worked. But according to the owner of it, who had it given to him, it didn't. And he said he took the top off of it. The reason why the discs weren't all spilled all over the place is because he took the top off it and took all the discs out. When he got it, there was discs all over the place inside. And he brought it to me this way and told me there was discs in it. He said it would rotate into position, it would pick up the disc, and then it would drop it. It did not even attempt to spin. And it would go through all the discs like that and then drop it. So it kind of sounds like it may not have been detecting the start of position. And just from it doing it several times, it cleaned the contacts enough to make it work. So when I tried it, it worked. So I've cleaned up the contacts, put some deoxide on there to keep the contacts from getting dirty, and we're going to let it run and see whether whether we have any more problems with it. But I'm just going to let the thing sit here on my bench while I go pick up my bike at the shop, as I took it in this morning to get oil changed and stuff on it, and take it out for a nice little ride. And by the time I get back, if this thing's still working, then I think I'll be pretty confident that it is working. So we'll close off the video now. Thanks for watching. We'll catch you in the next one. Bye for now.